Good evening, good people. It's your girl Nicole, and I'm coming to you live from the Beauty for Ashes room. Y'all know what day it is. That's right, it's Wednesday. I hope you all had a good, positive, and productive day today. Welcome to the 6th episode of season 3 of Home Speaks. All right, so tonight I'll be coming from the topic, don't rush God's timing. So let's just dive right in and see if we can unpack this topic. Now, if you follow me, then you know what's next. That's right, I gotta give you a definition. So, to rush is defined as to move with urgent haste. It's a sudden, quick movement towards something. It's a rapid advance. And so many times we rush to do all sorts of things. Like someone may ask us to do something or to go somewhere. We just jump up and, yes, I'll go. Sure, I'll do it. Right? And we rush to do these things and we don't even think about it before we say yes, before we agree to it. We rush in the morning time, get going to work. And most of the time we be late. I'm guilty. My hand is raised. We rush in the morning and we're late. And then what happens? You know what happens when you get up and you going to work and you're late? You're always, 99% of the time, you're going to run into traffic. Or you're going to run into somebody that's going slower than you need them to go. Right? And then we be mad with them like it's their fault. But that's what we do when we rush. When we rush, we want people to be on our same timeline. We want them to go. But we need to slow down, right? And sometimes some things will actually do just that for us. It will slow us down. But we rush, and most times we forget to think about the consequences before thinking the whole thing through, right? We rush when we should be waiting on God's timing for the things of this world, right? So with that being said, let's go to the other half of the coin. Let's look at the word. Now y'all know I got to bring Bible in this somehow, right? And there were these stories in the Bible where people rushed into things instead of waiting on God's timing. So let's just talk about it for a minute. And I'm sure you have all read and heard or read the story for yourself about the prodigal son. Well, at least I hope you have read it for yourself. So Jesus tells the story of this lost son. He tells this parable of the lost son in the book of Luke, chapter 15. So there's this man that has two sons. And the younger one wanted all his inheritance before his time. He wanted all his stuff right away so he could leave his father's house. Well, as you know, the father gave the son what he asked for. He gave the son what he asked for, and the son went off into the world and he squandered everything living wild. But that's what happens when we rush God's timing and we get things too early. We must handle what we have. He should have never gotten his inheritance that early. But because he rushed ahead of God, he had to suffer the consequences of his actions. So he experienced a famine and began to be in need, and he ended up living with pigs, hoping to eat what the pigs left. I need y'all to catch what I'm saying. Can you imagine coming from living in a place where you had servants that were serving you to now you're living amongst pigs, hoping to get what they leave back? I want y'all to think about that. Picture that for a moment. Because that's what's happened. That's what happened to this to the young son. That's what happened to him. That's what happens to us sometimes. And that happens because we get ahead of God's timing. Now, when the son came to his senses, and this is after a while had passed, he came to his senses and he went back to his father's house. But he was met with open arms. He told his father, I have sinned against heaven and you. And just like some of us as parents, we allow our kids, when our kids go astray, we allow them to come back as if nothing happened. And that's what love looks like. That's what parents do. That's what we do. Of course you can come home, right? And that is how God treats us as well. When we come to our senses and we turn back towards him, he accepts us back into his loving arms like nothing has ever happened, like we never left his side. But I want you to think about this. All the son's misfortune after he left his father's house could have been avoided if he waited on God's timing to get his inheritance. Had he not rushed God's timing, had he not gotten ahead of God, he would have gotten his inheritance when the time was right, and he would have avoided all the trauma and all the pain and all the misfortune that he dealt with by leaving before time. And not only that, remember I said he's the young son. And traditionally, the older son gets his inheritance first. So that goes to show you how out of order the son was in the first place. Now, the younger son, like many of us right now, are rebellious and immature, and we want to be free to live as we please. But for him, he had to hit rock bottom before he came back to his senses. And that's what has to happen to some of us as well. Because, if you think about it, who does that sound like? It sounds just like us. And it often takes great sorrow and tragedy to cause people to look to the one who can help them, which is God. But isn't it funny that sometimes, for some of us, that's the only time we call out to God, we seek God, we acknowledge God, only when something is wrong. So my question for you is, are you trying to live life your own way, selfishly pushing aside any responsibility or commitments that get in your way? Because if that's how you're living, if you are living that way, stop it right now. Stop and look before you hit rock bottom. Stop and think before you hit rock bottom. Stop and go back and read the stories that I mentioned. Stop and think about the consequences, because it's not just you. You can save yourself and your family a whole lot of grief if you just stop and just don't rush ahead of God. Stay behind God like you're supposed to. Follow him like you're supposed to. But if you don't and you rush his timing, there are consequences that you're going to have to deal with. So let's look at another story in the Bible. And this story is coming from the book of Genesis. And you all remember, I'm sure, I hope I should say, the story of Abram and Sarai. People call them Abram and Sarah. But God made a covenant with Abram and told him he would indeed have a child. Now, Abram believed what God said to him in that moment, but his wife, Sarai, did not. So what did she do? Well, she took matters into her own hands, and she petitioned her slave, and she gave her to her husband to be his wife. And of course, they conceived a child and named him Ishmael. Now let me stop there for a minute. Can you imagine this day and age, you doing that? Do you even see yourself being able to do that? See, listen, Sarai believed that she could build her family through her slave, Hagar. Well, if you read the rest of the story, you know that was one of the biggest mistakes that she ever made, and it was also a sin against God. Now, Sarai despised Hagar, and she even had the audacity to be mad with her husband, Abram, telling him he was the reason she was suffering. But how in the world can Sarai be upset for the mess she actually created? This is the mess she created when she got ahead of God's plans. But again, this is what happens when you think you know more than God. And then when we get in our mess, we blame everyone else but ourselves. But let me give you some history behind this story. Now, Sarai gave Hagar to Abram as a substitute wife. And this was a common practice during that time. A married woman who could not have children was shamed by her peers and was often required to give a female servant to her husband in order to produce heirs. The children born to the servant woman were considered the children of the wife. So Abram was acting in line with the custom during that time, but his actions showed that his faith had wavered in what God had told him, in what God had promised him. But in that history lesson, how many of us is going to do that? I couldn't imagine, if I couldn't bear any children, that I would have to give my husband to a servant or to anybody, right? But that was the time that they were living in. So could you imagine having to do that? Could you imagine having to deal with that? So she did have a lot on her plate, right? She did have, her peers were probably talking bad about her, making her feel bad that she couldn't have any kids. And, if we tell the truth, we still do that today. We're just not voluntarily giving our spouse to someone else. But see, if Abram had kept God's promise to him, if he had held on to it, if he had not wavered in his faith and reassured his wife that they would actually have a child like God said they would, all of that could have been avoided. All the pain and suffering could have been avoided. But no. We think we can outsmart God. We think we know better than God. We think we can fix things better than God. We think that we know better than God. So we try to take care of the things in our own way, in our own strength, in our own mind. And most of the time, well, actually, I'm going to say all the time when we do that, we're not thinking things through. We just know what we want and we think we can do it better. We have got to stop dismissing what God tells us directly. Remember, God spoke directly to Abram. It wasn't no third party. It wasn't a prophet coming to him. It wasn't an angel. He got that message one-on-one directly from the Father's mouth. So imagine if God himself say to whatever your name is, John, Susie, whoever's listening, God speaks directly to you and tells you this is what's going to happen. What are you going to do with that information? Are you going to hold it? Or are you going to let somebody else cause you to waver in your faith? Because that's what happened. So we got to stop dismissing what God tells us directly. That information that God gave him directly should have been enough for Abram and Sarai to wait and watch God move, to wait and watch his promise come to pass. But like I said, because his faith wavered, and then he followed his wife, and their lack of faith came it caused a bunch of different problems. Now she mad with Hagar, and now they got this other baby. All this stuff could have been avoided. But it happens when we try to get ahead of God's timing. And when we try to make his promises come to life through efforts that are not in line with his will, we make a mess of things. Listen, let me tell you, God does not need help. We cannot fill in for God. Only he can do what he can do. Sometimes we just need to wait. When we ask God for something and have to wait, we can be tempted to take matters in our own hands and interfere, and it interferes with God's plans. But this is what happened in those two stories that I just mentioned. And it's the same way for us. We have got to stop getting ahead of God's timing. Yes, it's easier said than done. But if you don't wait, if you rush God's time, you're going to end up waiting even longer, a more longer time, and then you're going to have to deal with a whole lot of other stuff that you would not have had to deal with had you just let God do his thing. And I'm not just telling you this just to be telling you this. I'm telling you this from experience. I myself had to learn this lesson, and I learned it the hard way. I learned it like Sarah did, not in the same situation, but I learned it like the prodigal son. Unnecessary things that you will come into your life when you get out of God's timing. But I was impatient, and I wanted what I wanted at the time, and God wasn't moving fast enough, or God wasn't listening, or all the excuses you tell yourself so you can be okay with being disobedient. But we have got to stop doing that. But when I was impatient and I went off and did what I wanted to do, thinking, okay, I'm gonna help God. That way he ain't got to deal with this. He don't need our help. So guess what happened? I suffered the consequences for taking matters into my own hands. And I had to wait even longer. I had to wait even longer for him to bless me with what I was asking for. So we rush because we want what we want in our own timing and not God's timing. We may rush, for example, we may rush to buy a car. And if it's out of God's timing, I'm going to tell you now, you're not going to keep that car very long. It can get repossessed. The car payment, you probably can't afford it. You can't even afford the insurance. You can't afford the maintenance, the upkeep. That car is going to give you some problems. Why? Because you got ahead of God's timing. You were not supposed to get that car right now. You maybe were supposed to wait 10 years. But you can't wait 10 years. You want it now. Not only that, we might also rush to accept a job based solely on the money that's being offered to you. But let me tell you, when money is a sole motivator, rest assured that some hell is going to come behind it. If you haven't done any research on the company, you just say, what, you offering me $100,000 a year? Sign me up. Where do I sign? You did no research. You ain't asked to maybe sit with a coworker. Well, not a coworker, but people who work there to figure out, okay, tell me something about this company. You didn't know research. You just heard the money and was like, yeah, let's make this happen. I want to work there. And now you're hooked up and you're stuck at a job that you don't like. You're stuck at a job working with people who are ungodly. It's nothing worse than having to get up every morning and go to a job that you don't like. Man, listen. Can you imagine your alarm clock goes off every morning to tell you it's time to go back to the job for 8-9 hours to work with people to do a job that you do not like? That's what happens when you don't involve God in your decision making. Not only that, we rush to join churches. We rush to join a church because, oh, this is a big fancy church. This pastor is real popular. Not knowing that they raise all kind of hell at the church. That there's no unity at the church. That it's a lot of backstabbing and backbiting and backsliding at the church. And then you got leaders who don't even speak to each other. You got leaders who are in competition with each other. And now this is the spirits that just lingering at this church that are now going to attach themselves to you. Because now you're going to this church. You did no research. You didn't even ask God, God, is this where you sending me? Is this where I should go? So now you're at a church where you can't even grow. You're at a church that's not even Bible based. All because you didn't consult God. Listen, God will tell you where to go. All you got to do is ask him. And then we rush into relationships. We rush to get married just to say, oh, I'm in a relationship. Oh, I got a man. Oh, I got a woman. Or you rush to get married, not knowing who this person really is. You didn't even take the time. You didn't even take the time to get to know this person. All you know is you want to be in a relationship. So you do that, and now you're stuck in a bad relationship. You're stuck in a relationship with an abusive person. A person who doesn't know how to handle money. A person who doesn't know how to communicate. A person who knows only how to hit. A person who doesn't even care or doesn't know how to care. Or doesn't even know how to love you correctly. And you're stuck. All because you did not consult God. Believe it or not, you can ask God about anything. Okay, God, I met this person. Is this in line with your will? Is this somebody that I need in my life? This is all, I think, all part of this is your discernment. Ask God to turn up the volume on your discernment. And you'll have a lot of less problems in your life. Not saying you ain't gonna have none, but there'll be fewer. But consult God in all things. His timing matters in all things related to your life. Now, those were just examples of how we rush into things. But one thing I learned in waiting on God's timing is he will not bless you when you're impatient. He will not bless you when what you're asking him for and you're rushing him at the same time. He will not bless you with something that he knows that you are not ready for. He will not bless you with something he knows that you can't handle yet. He will not bless you with anything he can't trust you with. If he can't trust you with something small, baby, he's not going to give you anything else. He's not going to give you anything bigger than that, anything more than that. And it's not that he's denying our request. He delays giving it to us because our hearts ain't right. Our motives aren't pure. Our reasons for asking is just pure selfishness. Listen, God knows when we're ready for what he has in store for us. So again, don't rush God's timing. Let him do what he's going to do. And I'm going to end this episode by giving you the good benefits of not rushing God's time. It builds patience, trust, and reliance on him. And these are things that we should be striving to have in our lives anyway. It increases our faith in him. And most importantly, we have God's peace, knowing that when he does give us the green light to go do, to go get, to go be with, it's in his will, so it's going to work out. And there's no better feeling in the world as we journey on this road called life that God is with us. So waiting on God's timing, not rushing his timing, is also a sign of humility. It involves surrendering our desires and plans to him, trusting that he will lead us in the right direction. It will reveal God's purpose and direction for our lives. God's timing strengthens our faith and teaches us to trust God in our unfolding future. For as we all know, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Let me say that again. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. So don't rush his timing. Stay in his will to avoid unnecessary suffering. Don't rush God's timing. Good people, that's all I have for you on tonight. I pray that something has been said that will get you to understand that your life will be better off. It will be more balanced. It will be in line with God when you don't rush his timing. So be patient and let God have his way. I thank you all for listening. You all can follow me on my Facebook page, Home Speaks. You can follow me on Spotify for my weekly Wednesday podcast, Home Speaks. You can also visit my website, Beauty for Ashes 8. That's the number 8, to purchase my book, Beauty for Ashes, The Story Behind the Breakthrough. And you can also find my book on Amazon. And you can also find me on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, Nicole Holmes, Beauty for Ashes. And as always, if nothing else, if you hear nothing else, if you take away nothing else, remember this. You are appreciated, needed, valued, heard, and most of all, you are loved. And every day, not yesterday, not only today, not maybe tomorrow, but every single day you wake up, God will give you beauty for ashes. I'm your host, Nicole, and I'll talk to you next time. Peace.